We'll hear about a hurricane and start looking for shelter, but for others, reports of a serious storm means it's time to get to work. And for the Air Force Reserve, this is important work, and they took our very own KTVU's James Torres with them on a flight, the only local news reporter on board.
Yeah, they flew into that storm to collect the storm data that could indicate how much of a threat this storm continues to be for Southern California. James Torres joining us live from Santa Maria on the Central California coast with this overnight flight. Pretty intense, I would imagine, James.
Yeah, it sure was for moments of that flight. Good morning to you, Frank and Claudine. We're live this morning just outside of Santa Maria Public Airport. This is usually a hub for CAL FIRE. Large aircrafts here will fly out of here and work on some wildfires all across the state. But the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and you can actually see the aircraft that we were on last night, they use this now as a base to kind of launch some of these flights out to the hurricane. Specifically, we're talking about the 53rd Reconnaissance Weather Squadron, and that's just a long name to say the Hurricane Hunters. Let's show you what we saw. We rode along on their final flight of Hurricane Hilary, an overnight exploration proving the storm was weakening and weakening fast. We went up around 6:30 last night. We didn't touch ground again until about 2 a.m. this morning. The goal, they say, is to cross through the eye of the storm however many times the National Hurricane Center tells them to. Each time we cross the eye, that's called a fix. So for our trip, we attempted to complete 2 fixes. The only problem, when the storm was breaking apart, it's losing its eye shape. So these hunters, they actually had a hard time finding the center of the storm. Throughout the flight, I had a chance to talk to a number of different people on board. We spoke to the pilot of the aircraft, a young man from Florida who says, growing up in a state full of storms, this job seemed perfect.
We're making a great impact to all the coastal areas, and so what we do is we're providing information that really refines the track, so warns people way ahead of time whether they need to evacuate, and so that information gets passed on to the local officials, and then the local officials make the call on whether to evacuate their areas or not. So it makes a huge difference in keeping the public safe, especially on the coastlines.
Yeah, that loud noise you hear, that's researchers sending down what's called a drop sound. It's a tube launched into the storm, collecting all sorts of data, wind speed, wind direction, temperature, you name it. They get that data immediately when the tube hits the ocean water, and then all of that gets sent over to the National Hurricane Center. Those experts then will use that information to predict watches and predict warnings. Now, for the most part, the flight is pretty smooth, a little shaking here and there, not too much turbulence to deal with on this flight. However, one part of the flight that might make a lot of people nervous, certainly made us nervous once we became aware of it. Once you're actually in the storm, you're only flying at an elevation of about 10,000 feet. If you don't really know how high or low that is, I think low is really the better word. That's only about a third of what you would fly if you're on a commercial flight. So we're pretty close to the water, but that allows them to get all this information as accurately as possible. Frank and Claudine?
I guess so, James. And I know this all came together rather quickly. You were up in the air for 8 hours. Talk about how the crew prepared, how you prepared, and ultimately some of the crew members aboard that flight.
You know, it takes 5 Air Force Reserve crew members to get this flight going. Anything from pilots, you got spotters who are actually launching these tubes, you have weather researchers, weather officers, experts that know what they're looking for as well. As far as preparation goes, it's kind of a lot like a commercial flight. You know, when you sit down, you have a flight attendant that's showing you all of these safety protocols, the things you have to wear in case you need inflatables, if the plane were to go down, oxygen masks as well. We had that same kind of briefing with some of the folks right before we got on the flight, and a lot of the same things that you hear on commercial flights, exactly what we heard before we got on this aircraft behind me.
I'm so surprised, James, that you describe it as a fairly smooth flight. I would, in my head, I would never imagine that it would be smooth. I would be thinking you'd have one of those special bags next to you just in case it got a little rough. But it is really a historic storm that we're talking about. When we're talking about anything like a hurricane, I know you have a lot of familiarity with hurricanes in Florida, but I mean, for Californians, this is a very different situation. And for this flight crew, I think you said this is a first hurricane for them in this region.
Yeah, I thought I was done with hurricanes when I moved away from Florida here. You didn't expect one to come up the California coast here. And, of course, now it's a tropical storm. Obviously, we don't know that, or at least the guys who aren't experts in this don't really know that once we're up in the air. So I think it downgraded to a Category 1 by about 9 o'clock last night, and that's right when we were starting to hit the storm there. So we're looking at these weather radars, and the radars aren't really showing much, and that's why they were having a little bit of a struggle to find the eye of the storm, because the eye of the storm was kind of no longer staying organized here. So the guys up there, the experts, they're telling us, like, yeah, at this point, this probably looks like a Cat 1. We flew this yesterday. It was a Cat 4. Looked a lot more organized, and they were spot on. It was right at that same time, once we got the alerts later, when we got service back on our phones, that we started realizing, yeah, that was perfectly right. But exactly right when they said it, it was that Cat 1 storm. But as far as the historic nature here, I mean, these guys have flown a number of different flights. They don't just fly hurricanes. Back in January and February, when we had a number of atmospheric rivers flowing through our area, they flew those storms as well, collecting the same kind of data, hoping to achieve the same kind of goal, letting people know what they need to know to prepare before the storm actually hits.
You know, James, you and I were sitting side by side when you got the email from the Air Force saying, I think I'm going to Southern California to jump into this storm. What was the adrenaline rush like? And I know you've been up for probably 24 hours straight.
Yeah, you know, I had a lot of plans for Saturday afternoon and evening that I just had to completely clear and cut out. But getting that phone call, I mean, I think I got it around once the 9 o'clock hour started. Getting that phone call saying, we have a spot open. You got to be down here at Santa Maria by about 5 o'clock. Can you pull that off? And we found a way to pull it off, which I'm very grateful for. Grateful for the U.S. Air Force Reserve for giving us the chance to tag along with them, showing us what they do and being so graceful about it as well. But again, that 10,000 foot elevation, that altitude that we were flying, certainly makes you a little nervous.
Yes, a rare look, though, and certainly a privilege to go with the Air Force, and really so interesting for you to bring all this information back to us. The science behind the storm watching and storm studying is really remarkable. Awesome job, James. Thanks so much. Have a safe trip back here.
Yeah, now you got to drive back home.
That we do. That we do. Hopefully,
yes,
thankfully, the storm is a tropical storm. It's a lot of the rain is already hitting that LA area, but it doesn't look like it's going to be hitting much of our area by the time we head out. So thankfully, we have some smooth sailing on our way home.
Yep.
Bravo.
Some silver linings.
Well done.
All right, James, thanks so much for that live report.